The maternity ward was warm as a spot in the sun. Added to it, Emily holding her baby must be at the peak of happiness right now. "Wanna hold her?" Emily said with a smile to John standing next to me. John, feeling embarrassed in front of a colleague, scratched his head and looked at me. "Nah. I'd be scared of dropping her. Better not right now." "Really?" That Emily glanced at me briefly before turning her gaze back to her baby. It was clear she was trying to one-up me, someone without children. Man, I wish I had a kid of my own. I nearly burst out laughing at John's cheerful muttering while looking at Emily. Holding it back, I deliberately replied with a straight face. "What? Isn't there one right in front of you?" Gotcha, as if it were the most natural thing. Both John and Emily looked at me with puzzled faces. Then a person who enters the room hands them something that turns their faces pale. "My name is Sarah, 29 years old. John, my husband, turning 32, and I are in our 5th year of marriage." Yet though in different departments, we worked at the same company and married after an office romance. John, a salesperson bringing in contract after contract, was dashing, and with his excellent sales record, he was the darling of us female employees. Without any real contact with him, I used to just secretly watch John as we passed each other in the hallway. The way I started talking to John was really just a fluke. He helped me pick up some documents I had dropped in the hall. "Sorry, thank you so much. But no, it was my fault for bumping into you." "No, not at all. I was just spacing out." "No, it was me." We saying no back and forth. We couldn't help but find the situation a bit funny. While picking up the documents, we looked up, met each other's eyes, and laughed. From then on, if we met in the hallway, we'd chat, and if we left at the same time, we'd go out for drinks or dinner. John's stories as a salesman were broad and interesting, and I thought, no wonder he's top in sales. When we decided to get married, I heard several female colleagues were quite shocked. I quit my job once we got married and became a housewife. But due to certain circumstances, I started working again 2 years ago, but at a different company from John. Since then, we've been working hard to get that attention. Now, although we still have a mortgage, we've managed to buy our own condo and have a little savings. I wouldn't say we're as lovey-dovey as in the early days of our marriage, but I think we're... John sometimes comes home late from work, but on the days he gets back early, he's right there doing household chores with me. "You're working too. Sarah, it's only fair," he'd say. My friends would get jealous, telling me you've got yourself a great husband. Despite the joy we share, we've got our own set of problems. The biggest is that we still don't have any kids. John and I both adore children. We dream about buying our daughter cute dresses or playing with our son on lazy Sundays. We've been dreaming together since we were newlyweds, yet despite our wishes, we're still childless after 5 years. So with my age creeping up, I'm starting to think it might be time to seriously consider fertility treatments. John, on the other hand, has been unusually relaxed these days. A few months back, He was all let's work on this together, but now it's as if he's lost interest. He stopped talking about children altogether. Hey, don't you want kids anymore? I asked. John looked at me surprised. Why would you think that? Because you've stopped mentioning it lately, I replied, a little petulantly. At that, John gave me a soft smile. That's not true at all. I want to have children with you, Sarah, but I don't want to pressure you too much, he explained and gave me a comforting hug. Another issue is the slightly tense relationship between John and my dad. My mom says they'll get along eventually. But whenever John is around my dad, he gets noticeably tense, making me wonder if they'll ever really hit it off. Even after 5 years of marriage, it's understandable that John is still nervous, because my dad is the executive vice president of the company he works for. Just when he first came to my house to introduce himself, he was so nervous he couldn't speak properly. My dad even had to joke, "You're one of my salesmen, aren't you?" I got mad, saying, "John is the top in sales." My dad laughed it off, saying it was just a joke, which finally got John to smile. I sometimes wonder if he struggles at work because everything he does is quickly known to his father-in-law. When I express my concern, John just laughs it off. It's not that bad. When you're the son-in-law of the executive VP, even the bosses and seniors start treating you differently, he says. I never had that around me. Doesn't that make work harder for you? I wonder. Nope, he says, laughing, seeming quite comfortable with the situation. The truth be told, there's another reason why things are awkward between John and my dad. 2 years ago, John messed up financially in a matter unrelated to his job. It was my dad who bailed him out. That incident led me to start working again, and John ended up owing my dad big time. That incident led to me going back to work, and I suppose John feels a great deal of remorse towards my father. Dad never mentions it, but John is still concerned about it. I can tell he doesn't want to disappoint my dad, not just as a salesperson, but also as a son-in-law. Since we don't have kids, Anna and I often go out on dates on our days off. That day, after watching a movie, we bumped into John's co-worker while walking around town planning to grab a meal. "What a coincidence to see you here," had said Emily, noticing us first. It seems she was out shopping with her husband too. "That's a co-worker of mine. They got married after we did, also from an office romance." Emily, who was noticeably pregnant, said she was about to go on maternity leave. "Thank you for always taking care of my husband." Emily's face twitched a bit. "Oh, big deal, really, it's nothing," she said, her tone mixed with a bit of a joke. Yet I sensed some hostility. It felt like she was somewhat against me. "Hey, that's rude." "Tom," Emily's husband, chided her. "My apologies. We're always in your debt," he said. Tom seemed a bit younger than me, but he was solid and likable. His manner of speaking was calm, and he probably excelled as a salesperson. And it seemed that Emily got along well with John, as she would touch his arm even in my presence as his wife. Tom looked on at Emily with a mix of astonishment and annoyance. "What are you guys planning to do?" Her glance in my direction was provocatively challenging. But John, sensing that I was not amused, jumped in to smooth things over. Perhaps Tom was suspicious of the relationship between John and Emily, just like I was. Honestly, I didn't have a great impression of Emily, but I was starting to think that Tom might be trustworthy. But suspicion arises, it's hard to shake it off. I didn't think Emily, who was visibly pregnant, would go to a hotel with John, but it was possible that he was cheating. I decided to hire a detective to investigate because stewing over it wasn't my style. I also bought some hidden cameras. I installed them in the living room, the bedroom, and John's study. Detective would watch his movements outside, and I'd monitor everything at home. If he was cheating, something would come up. If not, things would just peacefully return to normal. I always take long baths. Cupping, it's my way of easing the day's fatigue, soaking in the warm water. I spend at least an hour in the bath, which is my sanctuary. And if John was cheating, this would be a convenient time for him. I brought my smartphone into the bath. While soaking, I checked on John's activities. Most days, he was either watching TV or working on something he brought home. But occasionally, he appeared to be messaging someone or making a phone call. I had chosen cameras with motion detection so they'd record even when I wasn't watching. I diligently checked the recordings and audio. And to cut a long story short, my desire to trust John was completely betrayed. To make matters worse, I learned that Emily's baby was John's. While watching the recorded footage, I couldn't help but let out a gasp. John was on the phone with Emily asking, "Is our baby doing okay?" I couldn't hear her response, but his tone wasn't joking when he replied, "That's exciting." During John's bath time, I checked his phone. I was shocked by the messages between him and Emily. "Are you okay?" "Not suspected?" "No worries." He doesn't even know he's infertile. That's a real blow to his manhood. It was too pitiful to tell him. Reading through the exchange between the two of them, it makes me feel uneasy. I wanted to tell them that, as human beings, they're both finished. I suppose she wants to say that she cheated because her husband, Tom, is sterile, and that's how she got pregnant. Or is he planning to excuse himself by saying he got his mistress pregnant because his wife, me, wasn't conceiving? At Titchens, I scrolled through their conversation on the screen and took photos with my smartphone, saving them as evidence. Furthermore, I obtained Tom's contact information from John's phone. Wouldn't someone feel the same way I do and want revenge on the two of them after seeing this? Two heads are better than one. It's always good to have company when dragging them through the mud. I made sure to gather enough evidence before contacting Tom, just in case he wouldn't believe his wife. Emily was cheating, and just in case Tom sided with Emily and got in my way. I arranged to meet Tom at the cafe without letting Emily or John know. To avoid alerting him, I phoned ahead and let him know that Emily and John were having an affair. Perhaps he had already suspected it because he didn't seem overly surprised or distressed when he showed up at the cafe. As when I thanked him for coming, he just shook his head and said, "No. I was actually thinking it might be a good time to talk to you, Sarah, about something." I asked about what, but Tom wanted to hear my story first. He said that talking about it would be betraying John, and he needed a good reason to do that. I showed Tom the evidence collected by the detective and the evidence I had gathered myself. When he saw the images discussing sterility, Tom's face contorted. "Functions. Emily seems quite sure about it here. Do you even have any idea about this?" "Yes, we've been married for 3 years, and about a year after we got married, we both went for a test." Tom and his wife had been very keen on having children right from the start of their marriage, so he thought it odd that they hadn't had any luck after a year. After we both went for testing, I haven't actually seen the test results myself. Perhaps Emily just told me everything was fine with her. Listening to him, I wondered why. Knowing that Tom couldn't have children, Emily didn't divorce him. "Oh, that's because Emily is in debt," he said. Apparently, Emily, with her strong desire to show off, had immediately purchased brand name bags and clothes to look good. Her salary wasn't enough, and she had been borrowing money to make expensive purchases. Tom mentioned that they were now repaying the debt together, on the condition that Emily wouldn't make any more extravagant purchases. Recalling how Emily had acted the last time I saw her, I could see how her need to show off fit the picture. She must have been unable to stand that John was paying more attention to me than to her, and perhaps she wanted to make Tom jealous as well. "Debt, huh?" John is a perfect match for her then, I blurted out, and Tom gave me a puzzled look. As thanks for his openness, I decided to tell him about something John did 2 years ago. That's quite interesting," Tom said with a smirk, surely thinking the same as me. "I'm thinking of getting a divorce," I said. "Yes, so am I. It's easier to discuss this knowing you're considering it too," Tom replied. Then he shared something he had been keeping to himself. "Did you start talking to John because you bumped into him?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, I dropped my documents and John helped me pick them up." "That was no accident," he cut in. "What?" "He did it on purpose to create an opportunity." According to Tom, John had noticed my glances at him for some time. He was sure that given a chance, he could become close to me. As my cheeks turned red, realizing I had been so obvious, Tom continued, "If it had been purely out of interest in you, Sarah, it would have been fine. That wasn't the case." "Different how?" "Yes, because you're the executive's daughter." John seemed pretty proud when he told Tom that he had gotten close to the executive director's daughter. And by that, he meant me. He seemed to think marrying me would be an easy ticket to climbing the corporate ladder. It all makes sense now. That's why he was way too conscious of my father and got so nervous when he came to greet us. He started telling people he didn't like at work that he could just mention it to my father-in-law, the executive director, he bragged. I hadn't known since I'd left the company. He married me to use me, to leverage my father's position like a threat. In spite of that, he becomes such a nervous wreck in front of my dad. I can't help but think he's a sorry excuse for a man. I told Tom, could you get tested again? I'll get tested too. John and Emily. I had no intention of forgiving either of them. John had been anxious and restless for days before we went to celebrate the birth. What should we buy for the celebration? It's a boy, he'd say, delighted, picking out gifts. The maternity ward was a warm, sunny space. When we arrived, both Emily and Tom welcomed us. But when John handed over the clothes he'd chosen, Emily was thrilled, and Tom stepped out to get us drinks. Perhaps Emily, holding the baby under John's watchful eye, must have been on top of the world. Wanna hold him? John asked me with a smile, standing next to me. With my colleagues around, unscratched his head and shyly said, "Nah," looking at me. Noticing my cool gaze, he quickly tried to regain his composure. Let's be scared to drop him. I'll pass for now. Emily glanced at me and then chuckled, turning her attention back to the baby. It was clear she was trying to one-up me, childless as I am. I'd love to have a kid of my own, John said cheerfully, looking at Emily. I'd almost burst out laughing at that and had to force myself to keep a straight face. Isn't there one right in front of you? Agitations, I said it as if it was the most natural thing, and both John and Emily looked at me with puzzled faces. What are you talking about? John started to say when the door to the ward swung open abruptly. Tom came in with a couple of bottles of water, saying is sorry for the wait, and handed us the bottles, giving Emily a folded piece of paper last. Well, Emily took the paper from him and unfolded it. What? Perhaps Emily exclaimed in shock as she unfolded the paper to reveal it was a divorce notice. What, is this some kind of joke? She panicked. John also looked startled as he peered at the document in her hand. Come on, Tom, quit the bad jokes at a time like this. It's in poor taste. It's no joke, Tom said flatly. While Emily's face went pale with confusion, while John reached out to grab Tom. That's when I stepped in front of John and presented my own divorce papers. Mine were already unfolded, clearly visible. So, unfroze for a second, then slowly turned his gaze to me. Just so you know. I'm not joking either, I said. I walked over to Emily's bed, said, "Excuse me," and started laying out photos on the bed. They showed John visiting Emily's house often during her maternity leave. What business did you have at my house when my husband was away? I asked. John, as a salesperson, had been using his position to visit Emily when Tom was out for work. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I cause a misunderstanding? Actions. I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd check in. You know, Emily and I started at the company together, and I figured she'd be anxious about her first baby. Yeah. Fun was just being considerate. How rude of you to suspect something else, Emily defended. Their panic was almost laughable. As if they could talk their way out of this situation, it was even more ridiculous. Oh, so you were worried and in touch at night too. Was that concern for Emily? Or for the child in her belly, perhaps your own? John looked angry as I said this. He cut it out already. Emily is my coworker, and this is her first child, so of course she's going to be anxious and worried. Yeah, just because you can't have kids doesn't give you the right to pick on me. You're just jealous of me, aren't you? I couldn't help but snort through my nose at Emily's words. Emily's face turned red with anger, and she gritted her teeth and glared at me. Don't take this woman seriously. Tom, this child is genuinely yours? Emily said, trying to cover up. Then Tom let out a mocking laugh. At the same time, I showed Emily the screen of my smartphone. There recorded was a conversation of her husband mocking his own sterility with John. Next, I played a video where he asked, "Is our child doing well?" See, there's the date and time. Should we check whom you are calling at this time, right here and now? Emily laughed mockingly back at John, who was momentarily silenced. The person I was on the phone with. It was me. So what? And we're co-workers. We joke around like this. I looked down at Emily with pity as she looked up defiantly. What's with that look? Duck it off. As she tried to stand up, the baby almost fell. I caught the baby and told Emily, hold on to him properly, as he's a precious life. And the baby, who had been sleeping until now, woke up and began crying loudly. Shut up! Emily yelled, just as Tom unfolded a piece of paper. I can't have kids. Emily, you know that better than anyone. Emily looked up at Tom, who spoke quietly and froze. Easily to his calm manner of speaking, his sharp eyes harbored anger as they looked down on Emily. To me, this happened because you can't have kids. Sarah, there must be something wrong with you just like Tom. It's not me, it's you. Sarah, can you not speak to me so arrogantly when we're about to get a divorce? I wouldn't abandon you even so. That's why I threw the test results in John's face. Who do you think you're talking to in such a condescending tone? Did you think if it was my fault you'd be forgiven? Or the test results paper momentarily stuck to John's face before falling. He exclaimed, "Oh, too bad. There was nothing wrong with me." It turns out there's nothing wrong with you either. Maybe it was just a matter of timing. Legends. I slowly spelled it out for him. Divorce. You do understand what divorcing me entails, right? Dunn's face turned pale instantly. I'm so sorry. I'll never cheat again. Please forgive me. Huh? Emily's astonished voice came out as John begged. Tom and I exchanged a glance and laughed. Dunn's mistake from 2 years ago. Without knowing much about it, he dabbled in stocks, racked up a debt of over $100,000. My father covered for him, and I started working to help pay it off. My father said, "You can use the money for yourselves," and that's how I was able to buy the apartment. But that was just because he was my father-in-law. $100,000 covered by him. Of course, I made John sign a promissory note. But from now on, in addition to paying alimony to me and Tom, he'd be facing relentless collection from my father. It was with Emily's debt as well. They were bound for a rough life. It was clear as day. Well, good luck. You'll be working together from now on. We'll handle this through our lawyers, I said, leaving John crying on the floor as Tom and I left the hospital room. My father, more furious than I, hired a lawyer he knew to squeeze every penny out of John. It's Afteria even using John's share of our shared assets, it wouldn't be nearly enough. John, once remarried to Emily but ignorant of each other's debts, was scolded by Emily's parents upon learning the situation and divorced again soon after. Emily's parents had temporarily covered her debts and she returned to her parents' home, but they were still obliged to pay alimony to me and Tom. She was subjected to daily blame from her parents. Emily was living a restricted life. But despite that, the baby, their grandchild, is adored by Emily's parents, living a life without want, it seems. I too was worried about the innocent babe, so that's a relief. John, of course, couldn't stay on at the company and had to resign. But he's gotta pay off debts, alimony, and child support, and now it looks like he's living in a cheap apartment, working from dawn till dusk. As for me, I rented an apartment and started living solo. I'd become good drinking buddies with Tom, and we meet up to go drinking on the weekends. He's not as talkative as John, but I quite like the calm moments that flow by with him.